Hello, everyone. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and welcome to the Leadership Exchange.
This morning, we're going to talk about a skill set as a leader that's not associated usually to leadership, and that is problem solving.
Yeah, Lupe, I think that's such a critical skill for leaders to not only have the ability to do good problem solving, but to teach others in organization that either are peers or that are part of their direct support group how to do excellent problem solving. And it's it sounds like it's kind of an intuitive, easy thing.
No way.
But yeah, you can really get off the rails quick. One of the things you and I see a lot is people go in thinking they're doing problem solving and they're just kind of playing whack-a-mole, throwing solutions at things without really having started what we know is the important first step. So you want to walk us through that, Lupe, or maybe start off with a little bit of story about problem solving?
Unfortunately, I don't know that I can start off with the story, because I think if someone doesn't really understand the elements that we're going to talk about, then the story may not have the right context. So I'm going to save the story till maybe a few minutes into this podcast episode, because I think then it'll be more valuable to our listeners. But for this discussion, we're really going to talk about some key things when it comes to problem solving. One of the most important things, which would be, hey, how do you identify the problem? Because there's a lot of people that identify the symptom, or I'll say the symptom, but they don't really drive to what the root cause is. What's the true root problem? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. The importance of picking the right team, and there is definitely a critical element to that. And then making sure everyone's aligned to the problem is super critical. Otherwise, you get people going in all different directions, or there's just not that synergy that can happen if you get people aligned. We also talk about, when you're doing your investigations, you got to sift through the minutia of information and understand what's actual facts and what are actual opinions. I think that's just a highlight of some of the things we're going to talk about. But let's talk about problems. First of all, most of us counter problems, right, Steve? You and I see that often. There's problems that are very obvious. Someone gets hurt. We have a big product issue because of something that happened. But then one of the things that's missed a lot is, okay, everything seems to be going well, but we don't have any problems. And that is, to me, one of the traps that can happen. And we're both a fan of Taiichi Ohno from Toyota. Steve, you've got the quote, I think, for that particular reference that I'm talking about. Do you want to share it with people and kind of explain to people what that's all about?
Yeah, one of Taiichi Ohno's practices was to go into different facilities and ask the leadership team in those facilities what problems or what issues are they facing. And the response a lot of times was, everything's okay. There's nothing really out there. And, his response to that was, having no problems is the biggest problem at all, because he knew that wasn't accurate. He knew there were things that were causing the teams that he was overseeing at Toyota to be less than optimal. He would challenge that statement every time with that quote, having no problems is the biggest problem of all.
The interpretation of that too is that, hey, you can always get better. So for you to say you don't have a problem means that you don't feel you can get better. And I think that is, for me, was one of the biggest sort of drivers for having our team continuously improve.
Yeah, Lupe, let's talk about that for a minute too, because we title a course Problem Solving, but you could also title it Continuous Improvement, right? Because I think one of the misnomers out there as people go into a continuous improvement opportunity, they're not recognizing it as, we got to define the opportunity that we're going after, same as you have to define the problem. And many times when they don't, you have such ginormous scope creep in what you're trying to do with the team that you never get anywhere. People get frustrated because either what they think they're working on they don't see any real progress, or other folks know that, hey, we're really off track. And so I think that's really critical, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. I think the next thing to really go into a little bit is some of the classic steps with problem solving, continuous improvement that companies take and where maybe they fall short. You want to cover that?
Okay, so usually they see something that's a problem to them. They see it. They immediately take, like I'll say containment. They'll try to contain the problem. Like, for example, a pallet falls on its side, let's say. Well, there's a mess I got to clean up, right? So I'm going to contain the spill. I'm going to contain the situation. But then usually, at least in the past with some of the teams that I've joined, the first thing that they'll say is like, well, we've got to tailgate, or we've got to do a toolbox talk on this incident. And I'm like, okay, that's good, trying to get people aware. And I'm like, okay, what else do we need to do? And they're like, well, we'll just make sure that they know that they got to do a better job. And I'm like, wait, what? They're like, yeah, make sure to remind them, hey, you guys got to make sure to be safer on the forklift when you're moving a pallet. And I'm like, okay, what do we think that's going to do for us, right? And what a lot of people are not understanding is when you say that, hey, my fix is telling people they need to do a better job, or hey, you need to be more careful, or hey, just a reminder, that is not doing an iota of improvement for you, right? That's really the message you're saying is like, hey, you, the people, are the problem, versus saying, hey, you know what, we need to take a look at our process. Like, what is our process? Do we have standards? Do we have a requirement? Should people be only moving pallets at a certain rate? Should we be using straps? Why is that pallet tipping over? Like, is it top heavy? Should we be limiting the size of the pallet, as far as the height of the pallet load? So there's so many things that we could be doing, but a lot of times the teams default to, hey, we're going to tailgate, or we're going to have a toolbox talk with the team, which is really that vicious cycle of we don't address the root cause, and we just put a Band-Aid on it, and we just move on. And then surprise, surprise, we have another incident in a few months, in a few weeks, or in a year. But it's like this repetitive pattern. And part of what we're going to talk about today, Steve, you can really take us there, is you got to break that cycle. There's something super critical missing in my explanation of the pallet incident that you're going to shed some light on, Steve.
Yeah, and I think the cycle that you're talking about, Lupe, is we all want to get to that immediate containment of the problem because we feel like we've got to do something. And a lot of times sharing the information, as you mentioned, through some form of tailgate or just in general communication, makes us think we're done. Everything's okay now. Everybody's aware, issue. We put some short-term corrections in that location, right size the pallet or whatever it is for that one time. And that's where the cycle really is going to come back and get you again of not having gone through enough detail to understand what that root cause is. So by all means, you got to contain situations when problems happen. If you're really in a true continuous improvement cycle and there's not anything to contain, you have a little bit more luxury to look at things deeper. And then that's kind of the next step, Lupe, that we're talking about, is how we go in and really understand what that root cause was of that situation. But really back in front of that is to define the problem. What problem are we trying to solve? And really get, that alignment. And part of that really comes in through the process. Lupe, you want to walk through this next step? It's the 7-cycle process that we both learned, from Toyota that we continue to practice this day.
Yeah, the credit goes to the Toyota production system. Toyota developed this process and refined it, and now it's kind of like one of those, I'll call it best practices when it comes to problem solving. And the steps are, you get the initial identification of the problem, but then you clarify the problem, like what is truly the problem. Then you really start to focus on doing your 5 why. You get the point of cause, Then you do your investigation, a causal chain with 5 whys. You could do other things too, but that's kind of the main tool that's being used. Then after that, you're putting in your countermeasures, which a lot of people see as call solutions. You're going to evaluate the effectiveness of those things, that whatever countermeasure you put in place. And then once you find something that's working the way you need it to work, then you standardize. So you make it permanent. And, there's a lot of other tools that you can use in conjunction with this, right? There's a PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, check, adjust. And then there's the Wheel of Sustainability, which is a book that we highly recommend when it comes to sustaining improvements in the work area. But we're not going to go into those 2 tools. We're just going to talk about problem solving. So first step of problem solving, before you identify the problem, you're going to have to get a team together, right, Steve? What are the keys there?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, it should be the senior most leader working by themselves, looking at the problem and coming up with their thoughts and corrective action, and then telling the team what to do next. Is that typical, Lupe? Is that the path that you would recommend? I'm
Steve. I said, what would you recommend, not what is the worst thing someone can do. I know you're trying to set me up there. It was kind of one of those aha moments you were trying to, or gotcha moments or something. But no, that's absolutely not what you, and I know you're joking, but describe what really should happen versus what
should happen is you've got to get the people that are most knowledgeable about what situation has just occurred or what improvement barrier you're going to try and work through. And typically, that's going to be a team of anywhere from 3 to 10 people. And notice it's not 1 or not 2. It's, getting to that magic number of 3 really helps look at the situation from a couple different angles. You got to have someone designated champion. Someone's got to be the leader of that group. And then at that point, you start looking at, okay, what are the subject matter experts we need to really understand this? So let's say it's a incident or an accident in a organization. Well, for sure, you need to have the supervisor from that area, but you also need to have the person that went through that event and maybe a team member or 2 that are familiar with what happened. And then you're going to want to maybe look at, depending on the type of event, some other subject matter expertise from maybe your facility maintenance team, maybe some folks from your quality team. So you can really put together a smart team of folks that are going to be able to go in and look at this event with a critical eye. And same thing on continuous improvement. If it's an opportunity to improve something, you're doing that same exercise. And this is where people rush in, they do the containment thing, and then they don't come back and make sure that they've put this team together to really look at the problem and get the team starting to put together root cause analysis. The other thing I would say, Lupe, and we get asked this a lot, as you pick the team, is it the same team forever? And the answer is no, or could be, but you can have people come and go on the team that are subject matter experts because you just need a little bit of knowledge from them in a certain part. The core, though, is that person that initially gets assigned as a champion. That person should probably not be changed out. And you need to make sure that they're the ones that are empowered to bring this thing to closure. And then, at least 2 other folks typically that are at the early start of that process are probably going to ride it through. But let's say your team is 8 people. You may flex in and out. That number could expand up to 10 because you decided through your root cause investigation there's some additional information you need, and the team that you've got assembled is not the subject matter experts. So you're going to look to bring in 1 or 2 other resources potentially. And when you start getting down to finalizing, you may get back to that core of, those 5 people to really kind of land on agreed to root cause analysis and, the different causal chains that were identified. Maybe some additional work that needs to be done. Separate that from what you're trying to solve and can get back to additional things that typically come up in, especially on a larger problem.
I'm gonna reiterate that a lot of times, like, problem solving tends to get only done by a management team, right? There's this perception that the higher you are with title, the better problem solver you are, and the more valuable you are to a problem solving process. What you said was the key, and that's that. Subject matter experts doesn't mean like you have to get the vendor in that made the machine. It means the people that are actually working with the equipment or working to do that process or task. Those are the most valuable people, especially the person that was actually there when it happened. A lot of times that does not happen, and it blows me away that people are leaving so much because then they leave things to assumption, and that's the next step. Is like, okay, you have your team assembled. Steve's advice about that, and then you want to really talk about the problem. And before you talk about the problem, you got to start with, I like to ask the team, hey, okay, what do we know? What do we not know? Right. And someone will say, well, I think this happened. And I'm like, okay, why do you think that? Because think is an opinion, but it doesn't tell me that it's a fact. So I want to know why you're saying that. And a lot of times this way of questioning can come across as like you're grilling somebody. So you got to make sure that you let people know up front, hey, I'm going to ask a lot of follow-up questions. I'm going to challenge some of the things. And this is why, because I want us to get to the facts, because only facts will be able to get us the right problem solving result, not opinions. Now, if you end up where you don't know what happened, like there aren't enough facts, then then you're going to have to go with, okay, everyone give their opinion on what's the most likely thing that happened. And then let's go and try and fix that. But you only do that when you're like absolutely at a loss. There's nothing that's going to give you the facts to determine what actually truly did happen. Then, okay, I could see that. But a lot of times there's a lot of people that will state things as facts. Like I was in a situation where a pump had failed and there was a diaphragm inside that pump. So if you can think of like a rubber disc inside there that basically flexes, and that does the pumping inside this particular pump for this machine. And the first thing that I heard when I asked the question, hey, what do we know, what do we don't know, was one of the mechanics that was there was like, oh, the operator broke the pump. I'm like, okay, why do you say that? Well, because they've done that before. I'm like, okay, how do they do that? Well, they overpressure the machine. Okay, then I'm asking people, hey, do we know if we overpressure the machine? Well, no, we don't know whether the machine overpressured or not. I'm like, okay, so that's an example of, hey, that's something we don't know. And I bring that up because in the end, we said, hey, if that's what we think happened, then we need to demonstrate that to ourselves. We need to prove that to ourselves. So my question was like, okay, do we have a way to measure it? Can we implement something that would help us measure it? They're like, yeah, we could put a pressure transducer, and then we can start monitoring and see what happens, and then we can see if the machine actually overpressurizes. Excellent, beautiful. But the mechanic initially started with an opinion, and we ended up going to, it's still an opinion. That doesn't mean that's what happened. But now we have a mechanism to separate whether that's correct opinion or just an opinion that in this case was not correct.
Yeah, Lupe, and I think as a leader, let's say you're the leader that's working on solving that problem. It's really important to, as you mentioned, separate the fact from opinion and to do it in a respectful way, because the challenge is when you disagree with someone's opinion, that can also shut them down from participating anymore. So you definitely have to do it with some grace and some skill, but it's so critical to do, because if you let just the opinions run the meeting, you're going to come up with a lot of corrective actions that may or may not be relevant to your point. Let's talk a little bit about one of the tools that you and I started using several years back that help teams define a problem. And it's a real simple tool. It's got 5 steps in it. Think of it as a problem matrix. We're going to go through this real quick verbally, give you a sense of how it works. The first thing is to say to the team, what is the problem? And what happens when you do that, you'll find that, and you have everybody write it down or verbally state it, and someone writes it down, is that there's a bunch of different opinions about the problem. Good example is a one that I like to use is, someone is walking and fell down, hurt their knee. And in a problem solving statement, people are going to really expand on why the person fell down. Well, they probably tripped on something. Oh no, maybe they had a medical condition. Perhaps they were reading their phone. And so we're not even getting to the first step, which is, what is the problem? The problem is a person fell down, hurt their knee. And it's that simple. And that's just, I think, a good example of what we were just talking about is when you don't know, it's human tendency to fill in some gaps just based on your own experiences that now suddenly start to bias the start of the process. So as a leader, you got to be really good at saying, okay, wait, what happened exactly? That is what we want to get to. And then the next part of the matrix that we look at is, who does the problem affect? And now we're looking at others that the same problem could impact. When does it occur is typically good: morning, noon, night, inside a facility, outside a facility. And why is it important to fix? Because at some point, there's a lot of these things you got to go address. And you might decide as a group that, hey, we've got other ones we need to fix first. So maybe we're not going to be able to get to this one right away. Most of the time, though, I think teams land on, yeah, it's important to fix because it's got an impact. That's why we even pulled the team together on the organization. And then describing the last part, how is it creating an issue? And so through those 5 steps of what is the problem, very clear, concise, who does it affect, when does the problem occur, why is it important to fix, and how is it creating an issue, you're able to build a problem statement that the team can get by. And that's going to help center the team continuously through this cycle of root cause assessment.
I know we call it a matrix, but for those people that are like trying to picture a matrix, it's basically like a table. So think of a form where you answer those 5 questions that Steve, and then you answer them to the right. Let's say it's like a table. And then once you've got those, then as you stated, Steve, you're able to really come up with the quality because it has all the key elements that you need to have in a problem statement. So, and then after that, then obviously you got to get everybody aligned. It's like, hey, does everyone feel that this is a good problem statement? Do we all agree that represents the problem correctly? Then I think the next step is you've gathered all your information, you've got the right team, you've got a great problem statement. You're really going to start to go, and we're not going to go deep into this because, that could be a course or a podcast episode on its own, is, you use the 5 why method of asking questions. And that is how you get to the root cause. You can also use fishbone diagram to get ideas out on the table. It's a brainstorming tool. But in the end, you're really trying to identify the root cause. I think this is a good time for me to tell the story. I think we've given enough to be able to understand the context. So the story was this different piece of equipment, part of a wash system. It has a wash system that travels back and forth. Think of it like it's got chains, it's on a rail, it moves the length of the machine to clean it. And part of the drive system for this, there's a sprocket that fell and damaged a bunch of other things when it fell. But in the end, the team determined, and they did a good job. They saw that there's a threaded screw that the purpose of it is to keep the sprocket on the shaft that it's driving. So it prevents it from slipping off. And that set screw is what it's called, is what retains, it's like a wedge that keeps, and it's referred to as a key, and that retains the sprocket in place. What happened was the set screw worked its way out. Through vibration, it worked its way out, and That's what caused this whole event to happen. I was talking to one of the maintenance leaders. I was responsible for the maintenance team at that time. I was leading the team. And so they told me about this incident, which cost like 4 or 5 hours of downtime with all the damage it caused. The root cause had been identified well, but the corrective action was where the opportunity was. The person said, well, we found what happened. The set screw had come off. I said, okay, so what are we going to do to prevent that? And he goes, well, we're going to have a mechanic walk around and inspect all the set screws every day on their rounds. They called them rounds. And I'm like, okay, that's one way of being able to take care of that. I said, that's a lot of invested time to really detect that there's the problem's going to start to come back. I said, can we prevent the set screw from coming out? Because that really is the root cause. And he goes, well, you know what? Yeah, we can put Loctite. And so for those that don't know what Loctite is, it's basically it's like this liquid paste that you put on screws and bolts to ensure that they don't vibrate and work themselves out. So it's almost like a glue that keeps it in place. And there's different versions of it, but that was it. And mechanics are familiar with it. And I'm like, hey, that would be probably a way to not have to have someone inspecting all the set screws, which is a lot of set screws, by the way. He goes, yeah, you know what? Yeah, we should do that. And that's just one simple example of where the corrective action was going to be, let's inspect to ensure that we don't do it versus really focusing on the prevention of the set screw coming off.
Yeah, and getting to that next level. You're absolutely right, Lupe.
Yeah, because their I guess you could say their problem statement was that, hey, the set screw, no one saw the set screw come out. If I had to go back in time and say what was their problem statement said probably was, or at least their solution indicated that their problem statement was more like, how do we make sure that we see when the set screw comes out, versus the problem statement saying the set screw came out. How do we prevent that? Small differences, but powerful impact that you can have if you're really focusing on the right problem.
Yeah, so critical to have the right problem statement. And I think also as a leader, it's important to recognize if you start the problem solving process and you identify at some point that you do have the wrong problem statement, that you're not afraid to say, okay, time out. I think we got the wrong problem statement. Let's go back upstream and reset on this problem statement. So again, it really takes some good awareness and knowledge, and I think questioning. And one of the quotes that we also share in some of the training we do, Lupe, in this space is the one by Albert Einstein, where he talks about, hey, if I only had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem, trying to understand its root cause, and then only 5 minutes thinking about solutions. And so as we've seen on these teams, and I think as your story alludes to as well, there was a lot of solutions that got thrown out without really getting to the root cause of the problem. Yep. And yeah, they may have caught, sending somebody around looking for all those set screws. They may have caught it a couple of different times, but it also throws a lot of cost at it, right? Now we got labor engaged when we can do something much more simple, cost effective, probably even more impactful than someone trying to catch or inspect to correct, right? So anyway, yeah, great story. Thanks for sharing that.
To reiterate what you stated, I love that quote by Einstein also, is that it becomes very evident. If you've done a great job understanding the problem, the solution or the countermeasure becomes very evident. And that's why I think he says, hey, I'd rather spend 55 minutes. And the 5 minutes, people say, well, that's not enough time, because human nature, at least most humans that I've worked with, they immediately start to brainstorm. Like there's a problem, the brainstorming happens, right? They like, oh, we need to come up with solutions. They're like, instead of saying, hey, we really need to understand this problem, they immediately go to brainstorming solutions. And so it's crazy. It's crazy that we do that, but it's part of human nature, I think, for some reason.
Yeah. And a lot of times you can manage that, as you mentioned, Lupe, by respectfully talking about, okay, well, let's make sure we understand the problem first, and you can parking lot solutions. You don't want to disregard them for sure, but don't spend time on them. The last thing I want to talk about here, Lupe, is leaders are looking at, how to improve their problem solving skills and teams, is to make sure, even when you've identified a good problem statement, you've got the right team together, you start bringing people in and out. There's a tendency for some people to say, hey, well, we're looking at this anyway, let's look at these 4 other things. And they start to kind of ride on the issue, but with a second agenda of items that can really slow down what you need to get done in the initial step. One of the suggestions I would make is just to call that out as soon as you see it happening, and simply statement of, hey, what problem are we trying to solve? Okay, well, that's a separate problem. That's probably something worth looking at, but we're gonna put it off over here for this time. We'll get back to it. And so it gives them, hey, you're acknowledging that they've got another idea or improvement that they want to bring up. You're not dismissing it, but you're also not letting it water down what you need to go after on the original problem statement. And that it happens a lot, and it sometimes falls out of the ideation process, or just people like, hey, they're looking at such and such a process, I should also bring up these other things. And that can really water stuff down. Or as a leader, you may stop and say, you know what, that is a bigger problem. Okay, we're going to stop and reset, and we're going to write the problem statement for that activity now. I don't encourage that often. I think solve the problem you're working on and then get back to it. But I've seen that happen, and I've seen the need for that to happen as well.
Not to get too deep in the weeds here with the 5 why, the 5 why. And when I say why, it's WHY, not the letter Y, the 5 whys. There's a really great video for those of you interested in going through that process. It's a really great video that's done by the Lean Enterprise Institute. So if you go 5Y LEI, the letters LEI, you should be able to find this on YouTube. And it goes to an example, and it helps you understand the 5Y process. But the watch out I would have is that sometimes you may not go deep enough on the 5Y. You may stop at a few steps. And I think if the example in the video really helps you identify the different spots where the mechanics that were dealing with this problem could have stopped and dealt with that only, but they wouldn't have been able to get to the true root cause. So that would mean that eventually they would have to deal with another symptom of the problem. And then sometimes you just go too deep. The moment you go somewhere and then the next step after that, you're like, okay, that next step didn't really give me a lot of value. It's not progressing my path to the root cause. Then you've probably hit the maximum as far as whys, how many whys you need to do. Even though it's called 5 whys, it could be 3 whys, it could be 8 whys, it could be 10 whys. So don't get set that, oh, well, this is the 5th one, so we're going to go with this. That's not how the tool works.
Yeah, and the last parting comment there is, don't try and boil the ocean. You could get crazy on people offering additional whys. So it takes practice. Highly recommend, some great videos, as Lupe mentioned. We'll put information how to either get to the books or the videos that we recommend folks take a look at. But Lupe, I think we're at a good stopping point, and just want to thank you for taking some time today to walk through this with me. For our listeners, this is typically a 4 or 8 hour course that we just covered in about 36 minutes. So a lot more to it, and happy to have conversations if you want to reach out to us at Instagram, or just request additional details for elements of problem solving. But we could spend a lot of time on this, and hopefully it's just whets your appetite on some things that you might want to do differently as a leader as you start to look at just improving your problem solving capabilities for yourself and for your team.
Yeah. One of the biggest roles that we play as a leader is to help our team solve their problems. Definitely a skill set that I encourage everyone be good at if you're in a leadership role. Even if you're not, but if you aspire to be a leader or you want to contribute to a team, that's a fantastic skill set to have, and you can get better as you do it, and learning some of these things, reading books, all of those activities will definitely sharpen your skill set. So with that said, this is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon.
And this is the Leadership Exchange. Everyone have a great day.